Welcome to our lecture on Roman rhetoric, institutions, and the systematizing of rhetoric. We're going to begin, of course, with two very monumental figures. First, we'll begin with Cicero. And of course, Cicero, the great Roman orator, lived right at the time of Julius Caesar, who was involved in the big drama regarding Julius Caesar. And while we won't have time here to go into a lengthy history of either the Roman Empire or the death of Cicero, I will make a few remarks about it because it is germane to what's going on. Cicero, of course, was a middle-class guy. He rose to prominence based on his brilliance and his oratory in the career of politics. He was consul and praetor and a number of other very, very high offices, highest offices you could within the Senate in Rome. And he lived, of course, during the time of Rome's transition from a republic to an empire. Julius Caesar comes along, becomes what is essentially dictator for life prior to his assassination, and converts the Roman Empire into an empire. It had previously been a republic, but largely a republic that wasn't terribly democratic. Yes, it was run by a senate, and yes, it had roughly a two-party system. The conservative and a more progressive or populist party, but neither one of them was really very representative of the people. Sound familiar? And Rome had been threatened by a number of individuals previously with a takeover or coup, and and Cicero was, of course, instrumental in some cases in putting those down and defending the republic to its last breath. But there was no resisting Julius Caesar, and even though Cicero waffled somewhat when Caesar rose to power, ultimately he was seen as part of the conspiracy, even though he wasn't directly part of the conspiracy to undo Caesar and to kill him. He was not actively involved in it at all, but he also didn't take up the cause of Mark Antony afterwards. In fact, he hated Mark Antony to a great extent and had given a number of speeches against Mark Antony prior to Julius Caesar's assassination. And Mark Antony, once he took power, was able to hunt Cicero down, kill him, and put his head and hand on the rostra in the Roman Forum. The hand, because that was the hand that he used to give all those speeches, the hand gestures, and the head, of course, because that was the head, the mouth that spoke ill against Mark Antony. That was a very bad move on Mark Antony's part, because even though Cicero was considered part of the elite, he was never considered part of the commoners. Was not a champion of the commoners. He was still considered to be a brilliant man, someone that all Romans were very proud of, a great statesman and a moral person. This was the beginning of the end of Mark Antony, but that's another book and another class. Just realized that Cicero may have died, but we all know what happened to Mark Antony. He got his in the end as well. We're going to be looking at four great works from Cicero, and I'm going to give just a quick little description of why each one is important. You've read excerpts from each for this class. Then we're going to look at the important ideas from Cicero, and I'm going to do it that way because you could go and you could dissect each work bit by bit, but since there is some overlap and there's so much to be mastered, what I think I'm wanted to do here is to just kind of tell you why each work is important, what it has in it that is important, and then dwell on the major ideas of Cicero, regardless of which work those ideas came from. So hopefully you'll follow along and see what I'm doing. In the Brutus, one of the very early works that Cicero wrote, is a talented young man, very, very talented young man. There's a dialogue, of course, on the Attic versus Asiatic style. Cicero, very much in the tradition of the Attic style. And what we're talking about when we're talking about the Attic or Asiatic, Attic is a more formal, dignified style. It is a more direct style. It's a less dramatic style. Asiatic is a little bit more rhetorically flourishing. It's more dramatic. It's a little bit, we might consider it somewhat over the top. It's not that Cicero or anybody says that one style is bad or good. It's just that Cicero believes that it is a more dignified style to go with the Attic. And of course the Romans would embrace the Attic style much more than the Asiatic. And by the way, by Asiatic what they really meant were was the Greek and especially Asia Minor, that area of the Eastern Mediterranean, and they considered Asiatic things to be a bit more emotional, a bit more, a little bit less pragmatic, a little bit less dignified and reserved. They considered themselves, in Italy, to be more dignified and reserved and stoic, and so they would adopt an Attic. But those Greeks, they're rather emotional. So and those people in Asia Minor, we would say today Turkey, but the Turks weren't living there yet. They're so emotional. Those sensualists over there in the eastern part of the Mediterranean. Anyway, that's the highlight there of the Brutus, is the thing to be looking for, is that dialogue there on those styles, the different styles, and why one would prefer one over the other. De Inventione is important because it puts forth the stasis theory that Cicero is well known for. He did this, by the way, when he was about 20 something years old. That is an incredibly young age to be putting forward something this sophisticated. And he puts forward basically one of the things that he's most famous for, we'll see in the next slide, the six-part speech. So he's doing this in De Inventione. He's doing this as a 20-something-year-old. And now, does he invent all of this? It's doubtful that he fully invents it. It's probable that people had been talking about the constitutiones or stasis theory, same thing. It's probable that people had put forward different ways of structuring a persuasive speech. It's Cicero, however, that really, this is his great contribution, that really solidifies it. He really puts it into very clear, very understandable, very logically organized, compact form. The six-part speech certainly is his own making, but were people doing different things with arrangement at that time? Of course they were. Could you perhaps uncover a document where someone else had done a six-part speech? Probably, but nobody did it as well as Cicero. They didn't explain it as well as Cicero, so it largely becomes his. The two later works here, De Partitione, which is a treatise on arrangement that deals with the different types of speeches and audience and how to arrange based on the chirotic situation that you're in, and De Oratore, which is probably his great masterpiece, which is a work that's on the proper training and role of the orator. These both come much later in his life, when he's about in late 50s or 60 or so, and so they're really his more mature works. So with Cicero, what we have is the most thorough and complete distillation of classical thought on rhetoric. That's the most important thing. Not everything he does is original. What he does that is original, well, it's debatable, but certainly what he gives us is his own packaged version, soup to nuts, five-course dinner, everything you need to know about rhetoric in the life and career of one guy. I mean, he gets around to talking about almost every facet of rhetoric in almost all of his works when you look at it as a body of works. And he explains it better, he puts it together in a more logical way than just about anybody else. And here's the great thing, it had a great deal of gravitas because everybody universally agreed that Greece had its Demosthenes, its greatest orator, and so did Rome. Rome had Cicero. Cicero was the greatest public speaker in the entire history of Rome. There's almost universal acceptance of that. There's no recordings, of course, but of course there are accounts. So Cicero's theories and works, both because of the way he put them together, what a complete catalog of writings on rhetoric it became, and his own reputation solidify his thinking as being the standard for centuries. There is no more complete codifier of classical rhetorical thought. And by codifier, what I mean is somebody who doesn't necessarily invent everything, but someone who is able to lay it all down, explain it all, make it easy for everyone to understand. So, for example, by the time Cicero comes along, it's pretty clear that there are 5 canons of rhetoric, right? Invention, arrangement, memory, delivery, and style. That's pretty accepted, but it's Cicero who says as much. It's Cicero who says, there are 5 canons, here they are, I will explain them all. Whereas some people prior to Cicero had been kind of debating about, are there 5, are there 3, are there 4, how many of them are there, well, is memory part of delivery or is something, Cicero basically untangles the mess and says, nope, there are 5, here they are. And from that point forward, that's pretty well accepted. So that's the weight that he carried. That's his reputation and his contribution. Next, we'll get into some of the very specific ideas that he had that are very, very important and lasting.